What a cool garden space, really nice. Well, right now I want to give you a heads up about the 60th annual Zilker Garden Festival. It's coming up on March 25th and 26th. Head over to zilkergarden.org for more information. Right now, however, we're going to be talking about rehabbing garden spaces, and I'm really excited about this interview. Leah Cherner from Delta Dawn Gardens is joining us. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you here. A lot of people move into spaces that used to have a garden, but the garden has kind of run amok. You're a big advocate for, before you pick up the pruners and the shovels, do an assessment, right?
Yes, you want to go in and kind of take a close look and inventory what is there that you would like to keep, and try to do that during the growing season, so things aren't dormant and disguised by being frozen back. And kind of pick out what plants you would like to keep. Sometimes you'll have to start kind of hacking away at the overgrowth to get there, but do keep a kind of a mental map of the plants that you will keep before you start that big clear out job.
Yeah, and you know, one thing that will happen in any garden space is there'll be a lot of unwelcome new plants.
Yes, really in as short as a season, you can get a real invasion of hackberries and all kinds of weeds, and ligustrums will get huge. So that'll be your first activity, will be to start removing all of those unwanted volunteers.
Yeah. Well, now let's talk a little bit more about that removal process. Sometimes you can just go in and just get individual plants and remove those. But there are occasions, I think, when you're rehabbing a garden space where you might just have to start again with particular beds, right?
Yes, and sometimes that's going to be a labor-intensive prospect. If you've got a huge stand of Nandina somewhere,
oh my goodness.
You might have to enlist some good friends to help you dig those out.
Right. I recommend pickaxes for Nandinas. Forget the shovels, get a pickaxe and go. And I've experienced this myself, where I've moved back into a garden space that I used to garden in, and there's just no saving some parts of it. If you really want to garden again there, you have to go in and remove. And some, that can be really problematic if you don't want to use chemicals, right? So what are some strategies for, if you say you have like nut sedge in a space, how would you go about dealing with that?
Well, it's an unfortunate problem to have.
Very.
And if the nut sedge has come in, what you really need to do is pull it. You need to dig it out by the roots, but you're going to have to do that over time. It's going to take maybe 9 months or a year or more of being really vigilant about the digging. But the other thing you need to do is cover that ground with vegetation that will smother out the nutgrass. So mulching's not going to do it. You need to actually be planting stuff and really, keeping that stuff that you're planting happy and while you're pulling all the nutgrass. And once you get a good dense ground cover, then you should be able to get the nutgrass under control.
Yeah, and ground cover or just plants that will flop over and swamp them.
Yes.
And I think ornamental grasses could be very useful for that.
Yes, like a low-growing rose would be really nice. You can use annuals, wildflowers. There's a lot of things that you can use to kind of help you along to fill in the spaces in between, say, those grasses that you put in or any like perennials that you've put in. Just anything you can do.
In terms of other kinds of activities that people can be doing, sometimes you have an individual plant that the previous owner or a landscape maintenance company has just butchered, and it's an eyesore. It's really badly pruned, or it's just so giant you don't know what to do with it. Let's talk about those two different scenarios. First, I guess a common one would be the giant scenario. How much can you prune on a really monstrous big old shrub?
Well, it kind of depends on the type of plant it is, but there are a lot of shrubs that when they get really woody at their base and they just don't look tidy and they just look kind of nasty, you can do some really drastic pruning if you need to. You can cut them to the ground, you can cut them like for an Ibelia, you might try cutting it to 3 feet and let it come back from those buds where you cut it. Yeah, that's what I would either cut it back or you could try pruning it back by a third and seeing if that helps control the growth.
I think a little experimentation is called for on that, especially if you're going to try pruning it all the way back to the ground. I've noticed that some species, for example, like the hollies, Yaupon holly or Possumol holly, if it's gotten really misshapen because things have buried it and it's kind of stretching out looking for the sun, if you cut those plants back to the ground, they will come up fresh as long as you give it new light. If you've opened it up enough so that they can grow, they can come back and be very attractive. Some plants, however, you cut them back to the ground, that's it. They just say goodbye. So you do a little experimentation with that, I think.
And a little research is good.
Yeah.
Some things like rosemaries can be tricky if you try to cut them back to the ground. They're not as forgiving.
Yeah.
There
are a lot of things that just, you cut it to the ground, it's going to be gone for good.
And you might just need to replace it.
That happens, absolutely. But again, I think that assessing and that looking period is going to be really important before you head into these big projects. Do a little experimentation and thinking it through.
And expect it to take a long time. It's not a fast process. It's definitely a slow, gradual process to rehabilitate a garden.
Right. Now, I mentioned plants that have been butchered, and there are some different options for that too. For example, like on crepe myrtles, a lot of times you'll see that somebody's come through and just whack them at a spot, and you get tons of little water growth coming, those water shoots coming up. One thing that I've noticed over the years is if you remove all those shoots, except one, and cut it back just to like a couple of feet, then it becomes a new kind of lead, and eventually over time you can kind of mend that look. But it takes time and planning to do that. Now, cold is another thing that can impact plants, not just poor pruning or overgrowth. And this year in Austin, we've seen a lot of plants that have really gotten burned. What are some strategies people can employ there?
Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to figure out if you're dealing with dead tissue or live tissue, because a lot of plants will just, even if they are usually evergreen, this year they might have lost their leaves because we did get so cold and we have had such fluctuations. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that it really is dead before you start cutting it. So you want to scrape the bark and see if the cambium layer is green underneath, and that'll tell you it's still alive. You don't need to cut it down. But if you scrape it and if it's brown, or if it's just more of a herbaceous material and it's spongy to the touch or soggy or mushy, you can be pretty sure that it's ready to be cut down. And sometimes with things like bulbs, you might be able to, if they're in a pot especially, you might be able to pull them out and kind of take a look, like are there any little buds on there that we can salvage and kind of divide out and then put it back in there. But I have pulled bulbs out of pots before and had them thought that they were goners, and then they came back and they were fine. So sometimes you want to leave stuff and wait and see, kind of.
Right. Well, again, gardener's eyes on the garden make a very big difference. And you can also, just real briefly, you can also look for pests like pill bugs on the plants.
In that case, you definitely, if you're seeing pill bugs walking around, especially succulents, rip it out because it's rotten.
Okay. Well, Leah, lots of good advice for our audience out there. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing this. I'm sure a lot of people got some, or taking notes there.
All right, thanks.
Okay, very good. Coming up next is our friend Daphne.